Welcome to Brave. Be inspired by the best leaders of Southeast Asia tech. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. I'm Jeremy Au, a VC, founder, and father. Join us for transcripts, analysis, and community at www.jeremyau.com. So, Chia, I want to introduce yourself about how you're a terrible human being.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think friendship definitely is pushing it, so let's keep it at that. Sorry if my microphone's a bit noisy, but I am on the walk. Cool. So, quick intro to myself. Ex-operator, now currently a VC. I look after early stage across Southeast Asia, India, and do LP investments, which is investing into VC funds in the US.
Awesome, Chia. And I think one fun fact that people don't know is that Chia used to be a firefighter in Singapore. So, Chia, any fun firefighting stories that you have?
Yeah, you lose a ton of weight. So my profile pic is like 30 kilos after that fun experience. Yeah, so at one point I look quite attractive. No more.
No, you just look like a normal VC with your vest in a profile picture with San Francisco in the background, right? So just like every VC, right?
I mean, that's how you get deal flow, to be honest. People look at your DP and go from there.
It's like, I want to invest as an LP into this fund because he's wearing a vest and he's from San Francisco.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Wait. So before you go, like, how controversial do you want this to go? Because I love to push it.
You like to push it? Okay, you can say all the controversial stuff, and then I'll be the nice guy who's just like, oh, why did he self-immolate himself on this one?
No one wants to do a controversial thing with me. That's so sad.
Well, we'll make it spicy. Like, it's like a nice spicy. It's like the Lao Gan Ma, spicy, right? It is like not too spicy. It's got some MSG, some juicy stuff, but not actually spicy. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. I have a question for you because it actually came up like an hour ago. I was talking to a friend of mine at Sequoia. And my question to you is this. You're a founder, Jeremy, and you've raised from US VCs, great US VCs. I think you're working in a great fund right now in Southeast Asia. The question that we couldn't come up with an answer to is, do you think that Southeast Asian VCs are more founder friendly than foreign VCs?
Ooh la la, spicy.
Yeah, like specifically US VCs. Right? We'll take them as the benchmark, right? And then we realized we couldn't actually answer that question because, like, in the US, you have stories like benchmark, super pro rata rights are super common. There's a ton of sharkish term sheets out there that exist. And actually in Southeast Asia, like, I think maybe I got it wrong, but like the prevailing notion and narrative was that Southeast Asia VCs are like more old school, therefore more sharkish. But is that really true, right? So we couldn't actually come to like a conclusion on that. I'm curious in your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I have some experience. I have conflict of interest, obviously, representing a Southeast Asian VC. But I think I want to talk about it like, let's talk about simple fact, right? Which is, a US global VC in Southeast Asia is actually a local VC within America, right? And so when I was a founder raising from Bessemer and NextView, which is one of the top seed funds and obviously top Series A funds in America, I wasn't operating with foreign VCs in that sense, right? I was operating with American VCs servicing the American market. And so there are global VCs in that sense. Bessemer invests globally. To some extent, the other VCs do as well, but they are local, right, for themselves. So that's an interesting dynamic that you didn't make me realize until we had this conversation. Everyone else looks at my funders as global VCs, but when I was working with them, they were local VCs. And actually, to be more specific, when I was working in America, in Boston, and then later expanding to New York, we were very specific about which VCs could add value at the city level, right? And so, we were founding out of Harvard Business School, an MBA program. We were in Boston, and we founded with, the top 3 seed, VCs is like NextView, Founders Collective, and Box Group, right? Those are the three on the Eastern Seacoast. And those are like, they only do seed deals, very reputable, strong pipelines into the Series A, obviously. And we weren't even really talking to the West Coast seed specialists, because one thing we realized was that if you're based in Boston and you're working with a partner from a great, VC or whatever it is, the partner should be based in the same city as you are as a HQ, because you're going to get so much help from them, right? You're going to get engineer referrals. And I think, I always sing praises of Next View Ventures, right? They were in Boston. They gave me like my leadership team, right? And they helped me close other people that I was pushing to close. But without them, I don't think we ever closed at all, right? And it was only possible because they were in Boston with me, right? And they had a deep Boston network because they had grown up in Boston, because they had their partners and their team was from Boston, right? And so even when I was in America / Boston, I was choosing to optimize for local VC, right? And I did not take initially like San Francisco VC money. I took the best East Coast seed money that was local, right? And I think that was a tremendous amount of value. Yeah.
Okay, but I think you're conflating or purposely avoiding the question, because like question is around like founder friendly, right? Because like value add is a piece of being founder friendly, right? But you can add a ton of value but still be a shark.
Well, I would. Well, I don't know about how you play a game, Chia. I don't really see so, right? Because I think it's really about the ROI, right? Like, every time we make a decision as a founder to invest in something or hire someone, we're always thinking about what's the cost versus what's the return, right? And so I think there's some VCs where they're more expensive, but they add so much value that, you'll be stupid not to take the money, right? And there are other people where, they're super founder friendly in terms of like control or valuation, but you also know that they're doing that because they're not very value add, right? So I think you're right to say, like, if you define sharkish as the valuation or the ownership percentage or the control rights that they're looking for, the price in other sense, then that's true. I think the higher price VCs and the lower price VCs, right? And on the other end, I'm just saying it's a different axis altogether, is, the high value add and low value add, right? And so on average, obviously, you're going to have a rough correlation, right? Over the medium to long term, higher value add firms get to have higher ownership percentages or higher prices because there's more demand for their capital. And on average, there are lower value add, they have to fight with lower prices. And then if you have high prices and low value add, over time, everybody realizes that this is a dumb term sheet to take based on versus other term sheets. And on the other side, obviously, there's a few folks in every generation of VC where everybody knows they're adding a ton of value in excess of the price, right? And that could be because the VC is trying to build a name for themselves, or they're new, or they have a lot of money, or they have a really high functioning team. And so I think that cluster of like extremely high value add versus their price is kind of like all the founders want them, right? Anyway, so I think but of course it's not, to some extent, there's some reversion to the mean here. So Chia, what do you think?
Okay. I will share. I actually, there's something I don't have a firm view on, but maybe just to rephrase the question to make it like easier. On a personal perspective level, like you as a founder, would you have taken money from someone that could have added a lot of value, but maybe is somebody who like could abandon you when things are going bad, right? Like, would you take that risk on a personal level, right? So I don't have any funds in mind or whatever, but it's like, that trade-off between value add versus like someone who can support you all the way. Like what's that balance?
I mean, it's hard to tell, right? In advance of the money, right? I mean, because that's almost like a philosophical question, because most founders, myself included, it's very, very hard to tell in advance of the transaction whether this person has a history of sticking by founders. So
let's say they have that reputation of not or of doing that, right? So either way, but like, upfront that, there's a bias towards one way or another. Like, how do you value like someone sticking by you, for an example?
Yeah, this is actually a really good question. It's part of the value add equation, right? It's like, because, the transaction or the price is there, right? The moment the term sheet is done, then there is some level, you have millions of dollars now in your bank, right? And that's the transaction, right? I think, Jeng, Chia, I think you're kind of asking another question, which is like, are you looking for a transactional or relational VC, right? Does it make sense? I think that's actually, you know what I mean? Because the transactional VC is basically saying this is a one-time transaction and everything else after that is, up to you and I and, versus a relational one that's looking to do that. And of course, it's kind of a fake trade-off, right, Chia? Because the truth is every VC is both transactional and relational, right? Their KPI is a transaction, but they are also human beings. So, okay, anyway, so that's me on the I always need to think about a framework from my training. Personally, I would always take the relational, primarily because, I think when you have no money, the money feels life-changing, right? But I think at the end of the day, it's really about the business and the value. So I think people mistake the startup for the funds raised. And I think that's the biggest problem. When I hang out with founders, everyone's like, wow, Jeremy, you raised X amount of money. And I'm like, whoa, like I'm more proud about the team. I'm more proud of the revenue. I'm more proud of the customers. Does it make sense? And only a relational VC can really build that out with you and be there in good times, obviously. But in bad times, I mean, it's guaranteed there's going to be bad times, right? And so if you took the money for the money, but you didn't take it for the relationship, the trust, I think you can end up in some really sticky problems. And I think people undervalue how much that is a negative risk in terms of, startup survivability, I would say, honestly. But also I think they undervalue its impact on the actual operating value, you can call it, of the startup itself. What do you think, Chia? Like, I mean, obviously as a VC who's been in the game for longer, you've hung out with VCs who've explicitly told you like, we focus more on the transactions versus those who are more focused on the relational component, right? So how do you see the difference in their approaches?
Yeah, so maybe to contextualize why I asked the question, I'll give my input and on this, like, because when we think about like global VC in a sense, I think global here normally means like US focused. Like some people may have the view that they're more relationship. Some people may have the view they're more transactional, and so it actually has an interesting kind of implication for that, right? Like especially if you have VCs who are perhaps like dipping their toes a little bit, and then sometimes they're more relational and sometimes they're way more transactional. But I find like no one believes that they are of the same level as local VCs. So there's kind of one of the differentiators there is. But to answer your question, like I don't think anyone will ever claim that they are transactional, right? Like I think that's a bad brand, that's a bad messaging, and so you never hear that. But then in practice, when you talk to founders and you do back channeling, like you hear all about it, right? I'm actually really conflicted. I don't know, right? I've seen situations where founders are going in eyes wide open and they're telling me, look, XYZ is like this, but that's who that person is, and they can add very specific value, and I need that value, and so let's just do it, right? And then I've seen it the other way around, which is like, I really like this person, and even though it might make less sense, like let's take their money and let's work together. So it's really a little bit of both. I personally don't have a framework on it just yet, right? I'm just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I think you say something, also, Chia, I want to point out that this is how we know your Laukan Ma spiciness, because, if we didn't name names. So, I think the question that we have here is, I think there's a lot of sophisticated founders who are okay with a transactional relationship because they're sophisticated and they understand what it is about. And that's what they want. And I think when you know what's the label on the can, then it's more obvious, right? And more straightforward. I think the sticky part happens is when a founder who on average tends to trend towards wanting to be relational on average doesn't realize they're entering a more transactional relationship, right? I think the corollary of that is that, there's still a transaction that happens, right? With the financing and happening because we are focusing on the business. I think when everyone's very honest and upfront about it upfront and everybody knows what they're walking in, then it's not just good, it's great, right? But I think when there's a mismatch or misunderstanding about, it's like, oh, I thought I was okay with transactional, but turns out I actually need more of a relational approach. Or I thought this was relational, but actually it's transactional. I think that's when sticky things really happen for our founders.
Gotcha. Okay, no, that makes sense. Maybe just to switch gears, another topic I wanted to bounce off you was also, and this is something I don't have a firm view on yet, right? So I've been talking to a bunch of like funds that are trying to make their first check into Southeast Asia, and super interesting perspective where they're coming from. A lot of them are a lot of these are like US funds or global funds. And they are taking the approach that, we see what's going on in other regions. And even though, perhaps we have a small team, etc., like we want to see similar business models and invest in those, right? Because we've seen the end state. Now, my contention with this, not that I reject the proposal outright, but my contention is that like 10 years ago, the path for development for tech was roughly the same. Right, Ecom 101 look pretty much the same everywhere in the world. Right now, you fast forward to 2020, Southeast Asia looks super different from India, which looks super different from China, which looks super different from the US, which looks super different from Europe. And my kind of problem with this whole method of investing is like, obviously, there's very important lessons to get from each region, but the degree of localization because of how tech has developed in their own natural way in these regions is so important that it's just really, really hard to try to copy wholesale, right? And I came from Rocket Internet, like I do see the value of that, but I also see like huge amounts of flaws with that model. Like I'm curious if someone who's looked in the US, investing in the US, and now investing in Southeast Asia, like what do you think of that?
Yeah. Well, two thoughts come into my brain, right? And it ties on to two conversations. I think first one is if a teammate in Southeast Asia or any region has a potential time limit for their time in this country, right, or the region, personally, it creates and shortens the game theory game for them to build a relational component with you. And what I mean by that is the biggest reason why most people are good faith it's classic game theory, right? The more games that you played, the more good faith you act, right? And then if the game is going to end in the next round, then everybody ends up, cheating on each other in the game theory exercise, right? And I think that happens a lot in the overall landscape in anything, right? It's like if you are a VC or a founder, you're committed to this geography for the rest of your life, then your reputation matters, right? Very, very much, right? And so you are incentivized, obviously, as a personal person, you are incentivized to act in good faith in terms of morals and values. But there's also a strong reputational incentive, right? For you to act as a good faith actor because you have that, 50-year game in front of you, right? As a founder, as a VC, as an operator, right? And it's easy to do due diligence on that. It's easy to do reference checks and vice versa, right? So I think that's actually tying both parts to it together, right? Which is like, and I think the reason why it segues nicely in the second point is you're having a conversation about when a team is entering the region, like, it's still TBD how committed they are to the region, right? Does it make sense? Like, and everybody knows that. I mean, it's, everybody's wise, everybody's fair about it, everybody's upfront about it, right? And so, of course, I think what most people who are entering the region will enter with their checks is their checks are going to be better priced or, or a better deal for founders on the price because founders are saying like, okay, you're new to the region. So the only way you're not going to get in is if you have the transaction is better, if that makes sense. Because I personally expect less from the relationship, right? You don't have local value add, local network. I don't know how committed you are to the region, right? And I think that's where the sophisticated founders are kind of like saying like, okay, if they're coming to the region, there's going to be better checks in that sense, but not necessarily a relationship. So that's on one side. And of course, the race on the other side is if you're new to the region is how do you show that you're committed to the region? How do you show that you can even though you don't have the network now, how do we build it out rapidly, right? And stick around, right? And I think that's a big question. Yeah. What do you think, Chia?
Okay, your point is more around commitment rather than like how useful. Okay, so I think I was coming from it from like a point of like how useful is cross geography knowledge transfers in the context of like increasingly complicated like local nuances which didn't really exist to the same degree like 10 years ago, for example.
Are you saying that because you as a VC think they're making a terrible investment decision? Or are you saying that as a founder who over believes their narrative that they do understand the region? So I guess what's your beef with this conversation or belief here?
Yeah, so I don't have like a firm view yet. I do have some thoughts, but there's I think two issues, right? Like the first issue is that again, if you go back 10 years ago, eCom 1.0 looked exactly the same almost everywhere in the world, right? People talk about localization and local nuances, but like frankly, it's still rather small, but it was still, big enough to screw around with some big players like Rocket Internet. Now, if you fast forward to 2020, the world in different regions like India, China, blah, 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 they all look so different, right? Like you can't even compare it anymore. And the existing infrastructure that you're building on top is just super different. And so now when you come with this value prop of, hey, like I can see what's going on in other parts of the world and I can implement it here, like that does two things. Number one, like it encourages like copycat clones, which may not necessarily be super successful. And then it's just like a ton of money being funneled into perhaps the wrong business models, right? And like promoting the wrong narrative that this fintech product was super successful in the US, therefore it must apply in Southeast Asia, right? Like, so that's increasingly the narrative that I see, which I wouldn't have had an issue with 10 years ago, but I'm not sure if it necessarily applies now. So, and so that's like kind of my question mark to the topic of like global versus local VCs.
Right. And I guess the question is, so first of all, I agree with you that if you invest by analogy, you're pretty sloppy, right? Like if X worked in Z, therefore X will work in, A, and that's the limit of it. And obviously nobody says that, but obviously everyone says they're doing due diligence and thinking deeply, right? But I think you're right to say that it's going to be there. But what's the beef there? Like, wouldn't that not be a problem because in 10 years time, we're going to find out that this VC lost a shitload of money in Southeast Asia because of this approach? I mean,
that's like 10 years time, right? Like in the meantime, you have global capital flows funding the wrong things.
I see. So what you are frustrated about, or at least you think is the side effect of that is that we are, this naive type of investing is pointing founders in the wrong direction to chase the wrong products. And it's also causing, I guess, local or more sophisticated VCs, more nuanced VCs from being able to get, proper returns, I guess.
I didn't say that, but yeah, I guess. I hadn't thought through it on that side of things, but yeah, I was just more kind of raising a general obstacle, right? Where like, I think there are some funds that I think have done really well, right? Like they come in from a different part of the world, like they hire actually ex-local founders to be investors on their team. And so that gives them a lot of the local context necessary, et cetera, et cetera. I think my issue is like, but in reality, that's not what most funds do, right? In reality, it's like one person, two-man shop, setting up and then pumping like more with an AUM that dwarfs local funds and then like committing accordingly, right? So like that's my big question mark over the topic of like, local versus more regional / global VCs, like the impact on the ecosystem per se.
Well, as speaking from a founder perspective, it's not bad at all, right? I mean, sure. I think, as a founder, it's okay to have more capital in because you want to have more people taking bets. And as a founder, if you separate your personal career trajectory and experience from the company success, right? So, okay, I mean, there's two scenarios, right? Your company was never going to work and you just got naive money and therefore you got funded. And then you had great time for 1.5 years and then you crash and burn, right? I mean, whatever. Or maybe you have 2 stacks of those kind of capital, so you crash and burn after 3 years. Well, that's terrible, obviously, for, I'll say, employees, especially for some employees who do the transition. But from the founder perspective, it may not necessarily be bad, right? Because now they get an opportunity to learn how to build a startup, right? Using this capital, right? And now they can take those lessons and use it to build a second startup. And the employees can use the experience to join another startup. I mean, it's pretty, the technology market is so tight that there's not much of a, transition to some extent. So that's the founder perspective, is it may not necessarily be bad per se for that. And I think the other argument I would say is, maybe all the local VCs are too cynical, right? Like they're too tight-fisted and, Scrooge McDuck here, because they have no vision and no, and so no vision, investing by analogy is a far superior investment tool. And
I think I need to write a Medium article about Jeremy dissing local VCs.
No, I mean, I'm just saying, like, maybe poetry works, right? Invest by analogy. And now certain founders get to build businesses that nobody else saw, right? Like, what's wrong with a VC being contrarian, I guess, to some extent, and saying they think it's going to work? I mean, the person who bears the pain of that at the end of the day would be the LPs who invested in funds that are less sophisticated in their investing by analogy approach, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point. Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point.
So I think the question is, like, who wins? I mean, instead of like, yeah, it kind of sucks and everything, but who wins, who loses? Like, you have too much capital in the market that's coming in inflows. Who wins? Local founders, right? Local technology employees. Follow-on like VCs that are able to, use that to get follow-on funding, right? Those people win, right? Founders who get to build a business that they never would have been able to build if the capital market was tighter, right? Moonshot ideas that could have never been made it also get funded. Who are the losers, right? Losers would be, LPs in funds that do this approach, but in incompetent or amateur way, right? So those are the true losers. Obviously, losers would maybe employees of incumbent companies that got attacked or disrupted, that otherwise would not have been attacked or disrupted because of this capital inflow, right? Yeah, those, at least that's a partial list. I'm sure there's a longer list of winners and losers.
Yeah. No. Okay. No, I think that makes sense. I think that makes sense.
Loser would be like, a local rational VC that's fighting against, great term sheets. But that's a competition argument, right? And so then local VCs have to fight not better priced. Again, it's not, price is a function of value, right? But higher valuation term sheets. Local VCs were to compete against that. So in global VCs will enter using higher valuation term sheets because the market price of their value added is lower. Whereas local VCs will have to compete more on value add to show that even though they have a lower valuation, they have better value add. So it's a better price. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think maybe this is just like, so I think what you say is completely rational and makes sense. I think I'm just like philosophically opposed to the end conclusion, which is like, by that, the logical extension of that logic is you just need to pour money in, full stop. Like, no need to think about it. Just spray and pray massive amounts of capital and you will get an outcome.
And this is why I love this banter. Why not? Like, pour more money in, right? It's the future, right?
You did economics at Berkeley, right? That's what they teach you there, right?
No. The economics at Berkeley is very much on the labor and union side and the microeconomics. So I do have a contrarian point of view personally as well. And we can do that for the future. I'm pro-regulator. But I mean, I think you could argue that, the future has been undervalued, right? In terms of investments into it, right?
You're talking about now where like the interest rates is like minus 0.25 or something like that. I don't think, no, but like that's a semi-serious point. Like more capital is needed is the answer. Like that's like the logical extension of the argument is very strange. I've never been able to grapple with that.
Well, that's a fair point, right? Which is what we're saying here is because interest rates are so low globally, so in some ways, if venture capital, which is all about finding technology companies to grow and change and build a future, as long as they outperform, a negative interest rate, then that's an implicit subsidy, which is also explaining why so much capital inflow is going into venture capital and private equity, which is therefore going to startups, which is therefore going into the technology and founder talent crunch across the world, right? So there's a lagging effect of, yes, the interest rates. And I think we'll see more and more capital entering the technology world, which is great for people who are building the future, because now your implicit, IRR rate, or, the hurdle rate, I guess, is much lower than you had to be for building investments. And that's terrible for incumbent companies that had to deal with a more rational internal cost of capital.
Yeah. I'm still philosophically annoyed by the logical extension.
You're annoyed that you're not the master of all the LPs telling them how much to allocate to VCs. So you'll be like a Soviet command economy. You're like, this economy can only take this amount of capital. And this economy can only take this amount of capital.
No, to be clear, the logical extension of that logic is mass unthinking capital should be pushed into the tech sector, right? Which is just a little bit strange.
Well, I mean, I think that's a straw man argument, because we all know that LPs are very sophisticated. We know that GPs are very sophisticated. We know that founders are sophisticated, and so everybody's sophisticated in aggregate, right? So you're kind of arguing against the market economy where, the invisible hand called price is going to find out better VCs, better founders, and better LPs will channel capital to the most productive use of capital over time, and we should let it all sort out, right? I think where I could agree with you, I mean, it's I do believe that regulators and government should step in to mitigate the worst case, especially if the job transitions, unintended side consequences, and so on and so forth. So I totally agree about that. I don't know. I guess maybe I agree with your philosophical angst there, but I'm not sure what your practical solution is going to be.
Yeah, no, fair. Okay, cool. I think we actually went super off topic.
No, I think it's good, right? Because I think I mean, it's not, you're talking about capital flow, right? And I think another thing is, I'll just debate with you a little bit on this, Chia. It's also for most founders, I don't think they're fully aware, but lots of local VCs are taking capital from global LPs. So I think it's less if you're a global LP, you're going to say, should I fund a US VC to enter Southeast Asia, or should I put money into a Southeast Asia VC that understands the local market, has been there longer, right? So the capital flow is still happening. It's just that some of it is channeled into global VCs and some of it is channeled into local VCs as well, right? So it's not as if it only benefits US VCs entering Southeast Asia. It also benefits local VCs as well.
No, I think that's fair. Cool. Maybe switching gears. I'd love to get your thoughts on, Mansio is a regional VC, obviously super smart GPs, and have done a great number of good investments. This whole global VCs coming into multiple regions, we've seen that in places like India, we see that in Europe, and it has, to a certain extent, helped to crowd out and change the investing dynamics of that region, right? So I'd be super curious on whether you have any thoughts on how that evolves, right? Just as an example, a super good friend who's a European VC, and just complaining to me the other day about tier 1 VCs coming in from the US and doing free seed investments and crowding out their space there just because of how much capital is floating around. So I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm speaking in the personal capacity always in Clubhouse. I don't know. I mean, I love to bounce this with you. I think, isn't the loser in this scenario emerging VC managers that don't get a chance to make bets on high potential undiscovered founders? I mean, that's because, the founders are going to get capital from someone on average. I hate using the word on average, but I think, that's the only way to think about it structurally. So I guess the real loser when you see global VCs entering, and I think this is not only happening in Southeast Asia, it's happening in Europe and LATAM, etc., right? Is I think established local VCs have an established value add and presence and track record, etc. So I think there's always going to be a niche for local VCs. There's always going to be a niche for global capital. So it's a competition, right? It's not like a slot or channel or lane. I think I like the word crowding out, right? I think it crowds out emerging fund managers that cannot tackle US capital flows of the zero interest policy. I don't know. What do you think, Chia? Because you worked a lot of LPs as well, right? So
yeah, I actually think it's the reverse, right? So there's two questions. I think number one is like where future business models will come from, and I think the overwhelming consensus seems to indicate that future deal flow will come from the next generation, right? So folks who are like 2 years out of their first tech job, out of their university, and those are the young, hungry people that are likely to build the next software company, next tech company. And so those are the ones, that you invest in, right? Like, and I did the unicorn age analysis where, it showed that the mode for even Southeast Asia, the mode for unicorn founders when they started the company was 24, right? So like that's basically 2 years out of university. And so what that has resulted in, and you see that a lot in the US, for example, is like solo GP funds, super young folks, 22, 20, who are basically friends with all the folks they went to first year of university with, or just super well networked, and they can like actually have a pretty successful first time micro fund, right? There's way too many examples to name, but they exist out there. And so that creates like pressure on existing VCs, right? Who get older and older and older, etc. And the second thing is, I think I'm just going to quote the Ken here, but like there was an interesting Ken article about Quona Capital in India, where they were at least making the point that Quona Capital was like tier 1, and then recently they've had a bunch of trouble, etc., etc. I won't comment on how true all of that is, but like their basic argument was like they've lost a little bit of their shine, and that process only took 5 years, right? So the 2 points here, like future of VC a little bit, and especially in the midst of all this like tier 1 global brands, and the second is like actually how defensible is a VC brand, right? Like the answer might actually be not really. So I actually think emerging VCs will do really, really well, but like and tier 1 global brands will do well, but there's that squeezing pressure, right? And we've seen like some very interesting methods to compete against that, which I think can be successful. But like my understanding and my framework is that that's what exists, right? So in the US, you see that super commonly, like Keith Raboy from Founders Fund happily tells everyone that he's like the most prolific LP investor into emerging managers, but really because like he's basically taking all these like young solo GPs, micro VC guys, and they are essentially almost working for him, but through their own shop, right? And I think that's an amazing strategy. I think that's a great strategy, but you then cut out and treasure everyone else in between.
Okay, this is interesting. So you are saying that VC markets will trend towards a barbell shape.
I'm saying in the US, it's already started to do that. And one of the points, and while I do believe it's not inevitable, but I don't want to like talk about all of that piece, but yeah, I definitely do think that that's where the US has gone, number one. And number two, one of the main points that you use to counter, which is VC brand, like it's actually an interesting one because, using the Ken's example of that particular Indian fund, like it seems to imply that VC brands, are not exactly very defensible.
Yeah, I'm processing what you just said. Because there's a bunch of different things you're saying, right? One is you talk about industry trends in the States. And then the second one is talking about is what do we see the trends in Southeast Asia, which is a different question. And then the third is you're talking about VC brand as a defensive advantage. And we're doing this in the context of the global versus local dynamic. So Chia, which one do you want to go in? Which direction do you want to go into? It's like 4 questions you opened up,
Whichever's most interesting to you.
I think the barbell analogy is an interesting one, right? Because I think we saw, and I think Clayton Christensen wrote about the disruption of the management consulting industry, which basically implied that as technology improves and so forth, and what's interesting is we actually did see that, right? We saw all of your middle market management consulting firms all get acquired, right? So, we saw
like Bain, right?
What are you talking about? Bain is still on one side of the barbell, but yeah, I think there's still a question, which is as companies become more sophisticated, as they use more technology, as implementation changes, McKinsey is still number 1, far ahead of everybody else in terms of so will they be the furthest end of the barbell? And then BCG Bain right behind. Yeah, I think that's the, So anyway, Clayton Christensen's point of view is more like there's disruption happening for the management consulting industry, and so they had to reinvent themselves. And that's why we saw Monitor Group, get sold. A whole bunch of other companies got sold to Accenture and, PwC and Deloitte and so on and so forth. So yeah, you could make the argument that VCs will get disrupted in that sense. Yeah, it's a possibility. I haven't done enough analysis, leaning back in this chair to be like, wow, the VC industry is going to go barbell shape.
Okay, no, I think that makes sense.
It's hard to use the analogy, but educate me, Chia. I was like, why do you think the US market went barbell?
Well, a little bit because of what we just talked about, right? Like if you do believe that fundamentally the world trends towards, just massive amounts of capital at founder-friendly terms, then you just add massive amount of capital at founder-friendly terms to like a tier 1 brand, and you kind of really don't need anything else to compete, right? Because by that admission, like the level of thinking needed is not very high to execute successful VC strategies, right? And so that's what happened, right? Where you literally just need a tier 1 brand with a high AUM, and then they just need to get in front of folks fast enough. And so instead of going through traditional routes, which is like, we are a tier 1 fund is a Series A fund only. These tier 1 funds decided to go even more downstream, and then they realized actually, let's capture more of the ecosystem. We can't hire all the super smart people or super smart hustlers because they don't want to work for us, but we'll be LPs in them, right? So then you're just like a funnel to IPO, right? A money ecosystem funnel to IPO, and your mode is your tier 1 brand, and you just need to, even though like that's not a super defensible mode, like you just need to make sure that every other brand dies first, right? And so that's the logical extension of what we've been arguing for the past like 45 minutes. I'm not sure, like I have no strong opinions just yet about like whether or not that's the ideal state, but I feel like, that explains how the venture scene will look like.
Yeah, I think so. I think the truth is, if you're, a tier 1 VC in the eyes, in the States, then you get all the deal flow, right? In inbound, right? Because every founder is like, this is like, it's like how like, look at university level, right? And it's like the safety school is the reach schools, right? And those are the dream schools, right? Those are the 3 schools that you apply for, right? The 3 bands, right? And so that's why everybody applies to Harvard, because, it's the dream school for everybody. Everyone's just going to put their hand in just to get a shot, right? And so Harvard gets to do all the thing. But if you're like a middle tier university or bottom tier university, then you have to start scouting folks, if that makes sense, right? To come in, right? And keep your selectivity high and keep your diversity and population good, right? So yeah, obviously universities benefit from the, the oligopolistic nature of the university credential system. So that's highly defensible in that sense. But yeah, I think there's some similar dynamics in the consulting industry, right? Like, if you're asking me, if the question is that a playbook that we're seeing happen in the world today in the US market domestically for VCs? The answer is yes, right? And if the Southeast, I guess maybe I'm just going down flow, is like, if the Southeast Asia capital markets and tech market was allowed to grow by itself without anybody joining in the region, then then I think it would eventually have reached that, but you have created a nice spread, right, of great local and middle tier and a long tail, right, like a pyramid structure, right? You know what this reminds me of? Chia? It reminds me of the arguments around multinational corporations into Southeast Asia, right? Like how open to foreign direct investment should a country be? And obviously there's a Southeast Asia approach where we have a ton of MNCs. And then we also have the China approach where you had no capital and then you went a lot of capital. And then after that, it became like somewhere in between, right? Where they forced every multinational corporations to JV in, right? To foster in their new next generation of champions. So does that resonate as an analogy or similar parallel in terms of a debate around Southeast Asia, FDI, and FMCs? Yeah.
I think slightly different. There's actually a very separate capital regime for financial institutions, and specifically like PE funds, which I think is the better analogy. But yeah, no, I think there's some overlaps. Maybe in the interest of time, like maybe last question I'll pose to you is, what do you think we need more of in Southeast Asia?
Well, you have to answer this. When you say more of, it reminds me of the second Wall Street movie. Do you ever watch the movie Wall Street? I think the protagonist asks the antagonist and is like, "What's the number?" And the guy's like, "What do you mean by number?" And the protagonist is kind of like saying like, the number is the number at which you would walk away from all of this, right? What number would you be satisfied with to walk out with, right? And stop, playing the game or whatever it is, right? And then the antagonist says, smiles and just says, more. It's a great scene, but basically he's just saying like, there's no one thing, there's no number that he's satisfied with, right? He's only satisfied with more, right? The pursuit of more, which is of course, there's a moral of the story at the end of the day. I don't know. So when you said more, it just reminded me of that. I mean, because, at the end of the day, what does Southeast Asia need? And it needs, doesn't it need more everything, right? It needs more founders. It needs more great tech talent. It needs more local VCs who understand the local market. It needs more regulators who understand how to, balance the various trade-offs. We need more like ecosystem builders. I don't know. It's just more everything, right? I'm more agnostic about the inflows, I guess. I don't know. What do you think, Chia? What does Southeast Asia need more of? Your turn.
It needs more people like you, dude. I think that's all we need.
What do you mean by that?
Just like unashamedly promoting you. No, I think it needs more experienced founders. I think it needs more founder VCs and more operating experience, and I think that will help us build a better community. I think that's always been my thing.
Yeah, I think that's actually a fair point. And I think one thing that I wish we had more of, and I think I got a lot of it in states that I didn't get or don't see so much in Southeast Asia, is like experienced founders giving back. Like experienced founders have gone through the whole process from like zero to pre-seed to seed to Series A to B, C, D, exit. Like, because I think we're going to have exits, but I think every founder who's successful right now is still busy with their own startup, right? So they don't have time or capability or even the license, honestly, to really build out the ecosystem, right? Whereas in the States, it was like, you would have many founders just chill or relaxed, who would catch coffee with you and get excited about, I don't know, the business, right? Get excited. I had this great coffee with this, Israeli founder who was in the States, and, they bootstrap company. I won't talk about the name. And then they received this giant valuation when they finally went to raise capital. And he was just excited. I don't know. He was just, I had a chat with him, and obviously I was coming in with more of a pitch approach, right? As a founder, blah, blah, blah. But, I had fun in that meal with him, right? It was just, being excited about the future. It didn't feel like a transaction. It didn't feel like a pitch. Does it make sense? I don't know. And I kind of miss that in Southeast Asia. It feels like a lot of people being very aware that there's a transaction happening. So it's less about what is being done, but how it's being done, I think. So yeah, I guess you triggered me in thinking about that. That's what I would like more of. It's like less about what is the capital, or what is the transaction, and what is the value, and more, I wish there was more of how is the transaction, how is the business, how we have a relationship, how we help each other, maybe that's my tie-dye UC Berkeley, Kumbaya side coming out, but that's how I think about it. Yeah.
Hippie capitalist. Okay, cool. That sounds good. I think we had a good chat. You want to wrap up, Jeremy?
Yeah.
And conclude?
Yeah, conclude. I think, what did you take away from our conversation that we had, like, to summarize? I'll tell you what you got me thinking about, which I didn't really think about. You got me to think about the barbell effect. And I'm going to have to do more research on this to understand this, because I do see the barbell effect in professional management consulting services, where McKinsey, Bain, and BCG is all that's left for one side of the barbell, and everybody in the middle died. And I think we do see the barbell industry for a lot of different industries, right? Like, online search, right? So I think the barbell is something I have to think about on the capital side. And I think you got me thinking about, when you use the word crowding out effect, it reminded me of the multinational corporation debate and the openness to foreign direct investment approach that different Southeast Asian countries have debated over. And then I think we see China on a little bit down one end of the spectrum, right? And we see, LATAM, for example, on a little bit more on the other side of the spectrum, right? So I think I probably will have to sit back and think a little bit more about crowding out effect and the barbell effect. I don't know. What did you take away from this conversation, Chia?
Yeah, no, I thought it was a good one. I took away your lack of philosophical alignment to my hatred of the money printer effect. I think philosophy is a great way to make economic decisions, obviously. So I think I need to come to grips with reality on that bit a bit more.
Yeah. Well, I love it, right? I mean, yeah, I guess it's my economic side coming out, but I think the philosophy side is also an important part. I don't know. It's a tough one. All right, Chia, I think you got to jump out, right?
Yeah, no, sounds good.
If anybody wants to raise their hands, feel free to raise their hands and I guess ask questions, I guess, and keep the conversation going to some extent.
All right, cheers.
All right, yeah, see ya.
See you, folks.
Hi, Yumit. Hi, Janine. Yumit, do you want to introduce yourself very quickly and then ask a question? Yep.
Hi, Jeremy. Thank you very much indeed for bringing me on. I actually wanted also to ask Jeng a question, because I did chime in with his philosophical approach when he was speaking about the e-commerce 10 years ago. And now in 2021, the world looks just completely different and is actually much more fragmented. And you can't just have like one system that would apply to all. I mean, and we have like the outlook for Asia is extremely upbeat and very bullish. What are the KPIs that you apply under these circumstances of 2021 post-COVID? When you make your investments, for example, in Europe, do you have like a recipe for that?
So just to clarify, I mean, it's a shame that Chia had to jump out because, this is our experiment on a two-person going deep in talk show format. I guess the question you're asking is, how do we measure success when entering a new market as a VC? Is that your question, Yumit?
Totally, but also against the background of the world changing very, very fast. Like, in Germany, I'm located in Germany currently, but I lived in Singapore. We're just lagging technological innovation. And when you speak about VCs and about going global or local, you're talking like about very advanced VC strategies, while we're in Germany still struggling, let's say, with the entry level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I think it's something I'm starting to understand myself. I'm still learning. I won't be upfront to everybody. I think that as a consumer of the headlines, I think we look at it from an innovation ecosystem perspective. And I think as a technology talent person, I think about it from like job opportunities and my salary, right? And as a founder, I'm thinking about it as my ability to raise capital for this idea. And to, if I'm a little bit more sophisticated, I'm thinking about some ideas are riskier than others, right? And the more capital there is, the more ability to support the riskier ideas in that sense, right? Or in terms of riskier as a founder, riskier as an idea, riskier as a team. And I think for the VCs, I think at the end of the day, the metrics that they're going to use is MOIC, the multiple on invested capital, and net IRR, the net of internal rate of return, right? And those are the two metrics that are there. It's like lagging indicators because we're looking at the book value and investments going up over time. So I think that at the end of the day, the metrics for a VC when they enter a new market, they're not looking at it from an innovation system. They're not necessarily looking to build an ecosystem. If they're entering a new market, that's saying themselves, I believe that I can make good investments that would be unicorns or have a high rate of return for my fund. So the answer is a little bit more pedestrian probably than what you hoped, but also I think a lot more real, I think, because I don't think they're thinking about it from how do we build Germany's ecosystem. Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question, Yubin.
Well, we could go deeper, but I think at this point of time, this answers my question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe to add one thing is, I think if you are, I'm just giving an example, a VC who's a German citizen going back to Germany from the States, I think you also care about the local innovation ecosystem because you care about it as a German citizen. Does it make sense? With home, as your ties, your family. But I think you would care less about it from an ecosystem perspective if you didn't have those ties. Does it make sense? Like the VC hat is different from the you as a human being. And those two things are naturally linked together because, so far we don't have robot VCs yet. Well, it's only a matter of time, but
Not yet.
We don't have robot VCs yet, but yeah, the robot VCs would only care about the rate of return, right? Does it make sense as a transaction?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, we do see some VCs try to do algorithmic investing. So yeah, there's no metric for the AI to be like, coach kids or be helpful, Anyway, Janine, you want to ask a question? Yep.
Hey, Jeremy, thank you. I've really enjoyed this format. I like the quick repertoire between you both. So I see I'm coming from Africa, from South Africa, actually. And obviously see a lot of parallels between what you were saying about what Asia needs and what Africa needs. And I would like to just make a comment and happy to hear your comment back that I've been working with startups in South Africa, and as the reputation of the work that my company Acro does has grown, I see that more and more of the expats in South Africa, or people have worked in South Africa now, but maybe they're from the US or wherever. I'm doing more and more work with startups in Oz, US, UK, and Asia, interestingly enough. So I'm always looking to build, I'm in the early stage space. It's really hard to get people, putting their money behind the startups in the early stage space. So yeah, if you could comment on that.
Sorry, I know where you're coming from, but I didn't quite understand the question. What exactly is the question here? Yeah.
So yeah, it's a general question, meaning that we're doing more and more work with people all around the world that have some kind of finger in Africa. Either they're expats from South Africa or they've worked here in South Africa, and there's a level of trust with the work that we do at Acro. But whether I'm dealing with startups both in South Africa, Africa, or around the world, my challenge is always trying to assist the startups in getting early stage investment. Obviously I understand the networking and I do a lot of that. But yeah, if you've got any kind of tips for myself to help the startups in finding early stage funding investment, that would be welcome.
It's a good question. I'm going to answer this in a personal way rather than from a tactical way, because I think there's so many tactical ways to help a founder. Like, right, it's like sit down, go through the pitch together, show them materials, right? Give them good examples, blah, blah. So I think there's so many, like I don't want to give you some tip, right? I think the trickiest part, and I want to create some class on this, but it's like, and I think all of the second time, third time founders I hang out with, we always talk about this all the time. But as I think for the founder, it is their one company, right? Does it make sense? And then for the VC, it's a portfolio of, they're picking from 1,000 companies to pick 3 companies, right? Does it make sense? Like, and in aggregate, the 20 VCs in the market will pick 60 out of the market. Does it make sense? Like, and so there's thousands of startups that are out there, let's say 1,000 startups, only 60 will get funding, right? So, I think the tricky part as a second or third time founder helping first time founders is being the bridge and articulating that funnel in a realistic and constructive way, right? Because the destructive way is to say you suck and you have no chance to be 970 people, 940 people out of the market, right?
Sorry, I have to interrupt you there. You have to hear my laugh because, I mean, depending on my mood is when it depends on how direct I am on that answer. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly right. I think so. There's a realism dose there, but I think the numbers speak for themselves, right? And I think the best founders have two minds, right? The best founders are fully believe in this idea and understand why this business is much less risky and much more viable than other people believe to be so. And the second part is that they have the understanding that they could be wrong, or that the jury is still out, or that there is still a search for the truth or the best company, right? It's a moving target, right? And I think the best founders are able to, as a result, have the conviction to build and do this crazy, crazy thing called building a startup when 97% of startups fail. 97% of seed-funded startups fail, right? That's insane, right? Think about it, right? It's like no startup founder would ever play roulette. I know so many startup founders who would never play roulette, never play poker, never play blackjack, but they build a startup. Does that make sense, right? And so they do that. So there's this craziness about it, but they also have the realism, and that drives the ability to improve on the feedback, right? And I think the tricky part of being a coach and friend to so many other startup founders is that you can only really coach the people who have both of those things. And that's really, really tough, right? Which means that obviously your aperture is, goal is not necessarily to invest in a certain number of deals, but it's to help your portfolio of founders in your incubator, accelerator, right? But only a percentage of your founders have that or will learn to have that, maturation process to be able to therefore learn the skills needed to achieve that. And I think that's why when I am helping founders, I try to focus less on the tactical things they can do, which of course is being done, but I also try to go deeper in the conversation and say like, hey, like what's the real business here? Like, why are we doing this? Why do we believe this is a great business? And, if the business goes great, I think the pitch follows, right? When the business is doing really well, when the milestones are being de-risked well, the numbers, the business speaks for itself, and the pitch becomes less important. So anyway, then the communication becomes less important. And then the VCs are trained VCs love hanging out with founders who have figured out how to run a great business and are very coachable and are terrible at communicating. Like VCs love that persona, right? Because VCs feel like, this is their chance to be part of a great business, and is probably underpriced in the market because these people are not great communicators, right? Anyway, Janine, I don't know what you think about that.
No, that's awesome. Thank you for that. Perfect.
Yeah. Reina, you had a question? You want to raise your hand and you had a question?
Yeah, hi, Jeremy. Thanks for putting me up here to be able to ask my question. So I'm a co-founder of an edutech startup. So what we're focusing on is actually, we really want to try to reinvent the way that people learn the language, Chinese language, right? And so I was thinking about your point where you were talking about 10 years ago. A lot of startups were essentially like copies of other successful startups that existed elsewhere, but they've evolved over the time to really take on their own like character and flavor. So in your observation or in your opinion, do you think this is something that might be the reverse for education startups, especially one focused on language? Like, for example, if we do Chinese language education, so naturally a lot of people would think about, okay, well, who are the best people to learn Chinese from? Probably somebody from Taiwan or Malaysia, Singapore, or even China. So do you see that as something happening? I'm asking because when we spoke to parents, one of the awakening that they had was, we're forced to do this online education. And so why do I have to limit my choices to what's available in my own country? Like, why don't I go and look for options outside of my borders, like say, for example, Indonesia? So yeah, just wanted your thoughts about this. Thanks.
So Reina, I want to clarify the question. Is the question are Asian consumers willing to look at regional players, or is your question that we should be seeing more Asian models of innovation now compared to the past, like, copy and localization? What's the question here? Yeah.
Right. So the question is actually centered around like, can like certain parts of the world or certain countries become like a concentration of offering of a service that's attractive to people? So instead of sourcing it from their own region, that everybody figures out, you know what, since this part of the world is really well known for this kind of education, then everybody just starts trying to get their services from a specific region in the world.
So there's a question: do you think education brands can be created out of Southeast Asia?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I mean, the truth is there's so many education brands, right? I mean, the answer is yes, right? Because you can create a brand around anything, right? I mean, like, obviously, my last startup, we were working using Montessori, right? Which is a globally reputable brand in that sense. Obviously, there's radio, there's so many things, right? I'm just talking about early education. Then I guess, to some extent in America, Singaporean math is quite popular as a form of material for a lot of kids being homeschooled. And I think you see a lot of technology-enabled boot camps and schools that are looking to build their own brands, right, around, whatever it is. I mean, Khan Academy is another, brand, right, of like, I watched quite a bit of Khan Academy. I also watched a channel called Extra Credits, which is like an YouTube channel explaining stuff, right? Using like games and extra history. And then there's Crash Course, which is another brand, which is around, the Green brothers on, history. And I learned a ton of US history. Actually, I learned most of my US history via Crash Course, right? As a brand. And I watch a lot of global history and stuff like that. So the answer is, yeah, you can create an educational brand from anywhere and anything. As long as people believe it, right? I don't think anyone is good. I think some brands obviously don't make sense fundamentally. Like, I wouldn't learn English from China, right? Just like ChinaEnglish.com. Everyone's like, what? Like that would be, Singaporean English, .com. It's like, who wants to learn Singaporean English? Who wants to learn English from Singapore? I guess. I don't know. But I guess, are you? Maybe let me ask this another question. Are you asking a question which is, do we believe as a group that people want to learn Chinese from people who grew up in Singapore? Is that your question?
Well, fundamentally, we do believe that there is demand from, it doesn't necessarily have to be just from Singapore. Singapore, we have our own academic standards that people try to meet when they're learning the language. So it's a bit more from the academic angle, but I'm thinking about it more of like, people, or especially kids who their parents want them to learn the language, and they can really come from anywhere in the world.
Reina, maybe just to clarify, are you asking whether a team in Southeast Asia can create a globally or regionally competitive app and education brand? Or are you asking whether education brand would succeed from is handicapped by coming from a region and is no longer being handicapped?
Yeah, it would probably be the second question.
I think at the end of the day, I think parents care about their kids. Obviously there's a duh statement. I have a 3-month-old daughter, and the truth is, yeah, I speak Mandarin to her all the time because I know that I want her to be bilingual, right? I should mention this up front. So I care about this topic. I want her to be bilingual, and we have read Chinese books to her and stuff like that, or Chinese podcasts and things like that. I think any parent who says, wow, this brand is really good because it comes from X country is pretty unsophisticated and it would be pretty unsophisticated, obviously. But I think the other way of saying it is I don't believe parents purchase or think that way, right? They don't say like, I'm buying this shirt because it comes from America, right? I think they're saying, like, I would buy this education if it's good value for money, right? There's a high ROI in that sense. It's going to help my kid learn. It's fun. It's simple to deploy, and it has a fair price, right? Or a great price versus the value. So I think the country dynamic is like the least significant criteria out of all of that. That's my 2 cents. Yeah.
Right. Thanks a lot, Jeremy.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions? Or Janine, you made any other questions that you have? Feel free to raise your hands if you have that question. Yeah.
I would actually, but I think this will last probably another 7 to 8 hours, and I can hear your kids crying in the background. So
no, ask a question. One more question, then let's go for it. Yeah.
Okay, I have a very specific question. What would you advise if you have a tech company that is very successful and they have developed an app in the esports area, and the field of expertise they're offering is just fabulous and it's not there, but the recipients, the football associations, for example, they are still lacking this kind of innovative impetus. So I don't know whether that makes sense. It's just like, let's say the football association and the football clubs are still in the 80s and you have a product of 2025 and you do know exactly they actually need this product, but they are reluctant to see the necessity for this. Does this make sense?
So you're saying, why does the customer not get it?
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, isn't that, well, it's like every parent and a kid, right? It's like, why doesn't my kid want to eat spinach or the equivalent, right? You know, it's like, I think there's only two answers to it. And sometimes it's a function of both, right? Which is either you're not a great salesperson or you have the wrong customer. Those are the only, you know what I mean? Like, those are the only two answers, right? I think there's some friends I know who are such great salespeople that they could sell me anything, right? And I think the tricky part I always tell them is like making sure they're building a product that is actually worth selling. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's not something you can build a company around, right? And then other question is like, what is the market telling you? Maybe these are not the right customers, right? Because, the truth is these customers that you just mentioned, the truth is they are buying stuff, right? They spend millions of dollars on, your customer segment, advertising, merchandising, salaries. So they are customers to lots of different things, right? So, but they're not spending on this. So either you have so they're not bad customers. They're not customers who are unsophisticated. They are sophisticated customers who know exactly what they want. So the question is, are you a bad salesperson, or have you designed a product that's not really a good sale? Or are you targeting the wrong customers, right? So do you need to go tighter with your niche, or do you have to go for a different segment altogether? So there's two answers. But I think if you end the conversation with the customer doesn't get it, or I think it's a very bad spot to leave the conversation strategically. And if you say the customer is dumb, or it's something that can be said, but it's not an actionable insight, right? The only actionable insight is how do we change our product / how do we change our pitch? And then the corollary question is, how do we change the customer who we're going after? Yeah.
Jeremy, this is just so brilliant because while you were speaking, I just made up a new strategy in my mind. Actually, maybe we should offer this to more successful, more innovative and flourishing clubs, maybe in Asia or somewhere else in the world, and then re-import it to our own country, because then it will definitely sell. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So many people are like, I always use the dating analogy, right? It's like, you're like, this is the one when you're, when I was a kid, right? Or a teenager, right? And then you get older and you're like, oh, wait a moment. Like maybe I wasn't the right fit. And these are all these reasons that I needed to work on myself. Yeah. And then sometimes you're like, and they're not the one, right? They don't have to be the one. They are a human person with a name, and, they will, be with someone eventually that fits them, right? It takes two hands to clap. They are a sophisticated buyer of who is the best fit for them, and I am a sophisticated buyer of who I am, and sometimes the other person realizes it faster than I am, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. I will take a detour. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody.
This was just so insightful. Thank you very much. Really made my day. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Janine. Thanks, Humit. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Just bye.
See ya. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share this episode with friends and colleagues. Sign up at www.jeremyau.com to discuss this episode with other community members in our forum. stay well, and stay brave.